I'm Marcus Sullivan, 42, disabled Marine veteran who gave everything for this country, including my left leg and my peace of mind. After years of fighting for my VA disability benefits, I finally had some stability. Then I discovered my own children, Sarah and Jake, had been slowly draining my account for months, thinking I'd never notice because of my PTSD medication fog. The betrayal cut deeper than any battlefield wound, but when the Veterans Affairs Fraud Unit knocked on my door, I realized this wasn't just about stolen money. What they uncovered about my family and what my kids had gotten themselves into would force me to choose between protecting them and seeking the justice I'd spent my entire military career defending. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought overseas. The Purple Heart sits on my dresser. Its deep purple ribbon faded from years of sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I earned it in a place where the sand burned through boot soles and every shadow could hide an IED. My children used to ask about it when they were young, their small fingers tracing the gold profile of George Washington. Now I wonder if they even remember what it represents. The bank statement in my hands tells a different story than the metal on my dresser. 3 months of irregular ATM withdrawals, each one small enough to fly under my radar during those medication-heavy weeks when the PTSD symptoms flared. $20 here, $40 there, sometimes $60 on weekends. The pattern becomes clear when I map the locations, one near Sarah's college campus, another by Jake's apartment complex, a third at the mall where they both work part-time. I trusted them. When Sarah turned 18 and Jake 17, I added their names to my account for emergencies. Just in case something happens to me during one of my episodes, I'd explained. Remembering the dissociative periods that sometimes lasted days. You'll need access to pay bills, buy groceries. They'd nodded solemnly, promising to only use it if absolutely necessary. Apparently, their definition of emergency expanded considerably over the past 6 months. My prosthetic leg aches as I sit at the kitchen table, spreading out the bank statements like evidence at a court-martial. Each withdrawal feels like another piece of shrapnel working its way to the surface. The medication makes me foggy sometimes, but not stupid. Never stupid. I survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by paying attention to details, by noticing when something didn't fit the pattern. The pattern here is theft. Systematic, calculated theft by the 2 people I'd die to protect. I pick up my phone and dial Sarah's number. It goes straight to voicemail. Jake's does the same, of course. They're probably together somewhere, spending my disability money on whatever college kids spend money on these days. The irony tastes bitter in my mouth. The money I receive because I can't work a normal job due to injuries sustained serving our country is funding their normal college experience. The Purple Heart catches the afternoon light, and for a moment, I'm back in that Humvee, joking with Rodriguez about his girlfriend's latest letter. The explosion comes without warning. It always does, in my memories. The world goes white, then red, then black. I wake up 3 days later, in Germany, leg gone, life forever changed. But I survived that. I survived the surgeries, the phantom pain, the nightmares, the bureaucratic nightmare of getting proper VA care. I survived losing my wife to cancer 2 years later, raising 2 teenagers alone while dealing with PTSD and learning to walk again. I did not survive all of that to be robbed by my own children. The bank statement shows a total of $1,847 withdrawn over 6 months. Not enough to ruin me financially, but enough to buy groceries for a month, enough to cover a car repair, enough to represent the difference between financial stability and anxiety. More importantly, it represents trust, broken, and boundaries. Crossed, I fold the statements carefully and place them in my desk drawer, next to my discharge papers. Tomorrow, I'll confront them. Tonight, I'll try to figure out where I went wrong as a father. The family photo from last Christmas sits propped against the salt shaker. All 3 of us smiling beneath the artificial tree I'd assembled with one hand, while balancing on my prosthetic. Sarah's wearing the red sweater I bought her. Jake has his arm around my shoulders, and for once, we look like we belong together. It was one of our better days. No arguments about college expenses. No lectures about responsibility. Just Chinese takeout and old movies. Now, the photo feels like evidence from a crime scene. Dad, what's with the formal dinner setup? Sarah asks as she slides into her usual chair. She's 21 but still looks like the little girl who used to braid my shoelaces while I read her bedtime stories. Her blonde hair is pulled back in a messy bun, and she's wearing her college sweatshirt, the expensive private school sweatshirt that I somehow helped pay for without knowing it. Jake arrives 15 minutes late, as usual. At 19, he's already taller than me, with the broad shoulders that remind me painfully of myself at that age. But where I learned discipline in the Marines, Jake seems to have learned entitlement. He drops into his chair without apology and immediately reaches for his phone. Phone's away. I say quietly, "We need to talk." "About what?" Jake's tone carries that edge of defensive irritation I've grown to know well. I place the bank statements on the table, fanned out like playing cards in a poker game where everyone's already lost. Sarah's face goes pale immediately. Jake glances at the papers and his jaw tightens, but he doesn't look away. "About these," I say, keeping my voice level. About the $1,847 that's been withdrawn from my account over the past 6 months. About the ATM locations that match exactly where you two spend your time. Sarah's hands shake as she reaches for her water glass. Dad, let me finish. The command voice comes out, the one I used with new recruits who needed to understand that their actions had consequences. I gave you access to this account for emergencies, food poisoning that keeps you from work, car repairs, medical bills. Not for whatever you've been using it for. It was an emergency, Jake says, but his voice lacks conviction. 18 times? Over 6 months. I lean back in my chair, and the prosthetic attachment pinches, a familiar pain that usually reminds me of my sacrifice. Tonight it reminds me of my stupidity. Help me understand what kind of emergency requires. $20 or $40 at a time, always on weekends, always from ATMs near places where you hang out. Sarah starts crying. Real tears. Not the crocodile ones she used to produce when she wanted something as a child. Daddy, we were going to pay it back. Things got expensive, and you always seemed to have enough. And you thought I wouldn't notice because of the medication. The words come out harder than I intended. You thought you could take advantage of my PTSD fog. It's not like that. Jake finally looks up from the table, and I see anger there instead of remorse. You get that money every month, whether you work or not. You just sit around the house most days anyway. We're actually doing something with our lives. The words hit like another IED for a moment. I'm stunned into silence. Sarah gasps and turns to her brother. Jake? No, what? It's true. We're in college. We're working. We're building futures. He gets paid to be disabled. I set my hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. Not from fear. I haven't felt fear since the explosion, but from rage so pure it makes my vision narrow. That money isn't payment, son. It's compensation for the fact that I can't stand for more than 20 minutes without pain. It's compensation for the nightmares that wake me up screaming your mother's name. It's compensation for the panic attacks that make grocery shopping an ordeal. It's compensation for giving up a 20-year military career to come home and raise you after your mother died. Jake's anger falters, but doesn't disappear. We didn't ask you to. No. I stand up, the chair scraping against the floor. You didn't ask for any of it. Just like I didn't ask to step on that IED. But we both got what we got, and now we deal with the consequences. Sarah is sobbing now, and despite everything, my instinct is to comfort her, but I stay standing. The question is, how do we deal with this? Because right now, what you've done is theft. Federal theft, since it's government. Benefits? That's a felony. You're not going to call the police on us, Jake says, but his voice wavers. I don't have to. They're already involved. Both kids freeze. Sarah stops crying mid-stab. The VA has fraud detection algorithms. Unusual account activity gets flagged automatically. I got a call yesterday from an investigator who wants to meet with me tomorrow. The silence stretches between us like the distance between who we used to be and who we've become. The Christmas photo seems to mock us from behind the salt shake. People who loved each other once upon a time, before money and resentment and poor choices drove wedges between us. What happens now? Sarah whispers. I look at my children, really look at the man. See strangers wearing familiar faces? When did we get here? When did love become transaction? And trust become exploitation? Now, I say quietly, we figure out if this family is worth saving. My combat boots sit in the closet, worn leather scarred by Afghan sand and American tears. I haven't worn them since my retirement ceremony 3 years ago, but I keep them polished out of habit. Muscle memory dies hard. 20 years of military discipline doesn't just disappear because you trade fatigues for civilian clothes. I pull them out now, running my fingers along the familiar creases where the leather bent with each step across unforgiving terrain. These boots walked me through 3 tours, carried me into firefights and out of danger, stood firm when everything else was falling apart. They were on my feet the day my world exploded. Kandahar Province, 2019. 3rd tour, supposed to be my last before retirement. Rodriguez was driving kid from Phoenix with a laugh that could cut through the desert heat. We were running supply to forward operating base Chapman, standard route we'd driven dozens of times. I was riding shotgun, scanning for threats while Rodriguez told me about his girlfriend's latest letter. She wants me to propose when I get back, he was saying, steering around a pothole that could swallow a small car. Says she's tired of waiting for me to make up my mind. Sounds like she already made it up for you, I replied, adjusting my body armor. The vest was getting too tight. He'd put on weight since my 2nd tour, stress eating in the mess hall. When the mortar attacks kept us awake. Yeah, but what if the world went white? IADs don't announce themselves. 1 second you're having a normal conversation about marriage and home and future plans. The next second, physics is rearranging your body parts in your life plans. The explosion lifted our Humvee 3 feet off the ground and flipped it sideways. I remember the sensation of weightlessness, the strange silence that follows massive sound, the way time moves like honey when your brain is trying to process trauma. I woke up in Germany 3 days later. Leg gone below the knee, Rodriguez gone. Entirely. The doctors said I was lucky the blast threw me clear of the vehicle before it caught fire. Lucky, that's what they called it when you lose a limb but keep your life. The boots remember what I try to forget. The weight of responsibility. The weight of responsibility. Cost of service. The way survival can feel like its own kind of punishment. Rodriguez's girlfriend sent me a letter 6 months later. She'd gotten the ring anyway, she said, and was wearing it around her neck on a chain. Said it helped her feel connected to him. I never wrote back what do you say to grief like that. The VA disability process started before I'd even learned to walk on the prosthetic. Forms and evaluations, doctor's appointments, and psychological assessments. Rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Describe how your injury affects your daily activities. Do you experience nightmares, flashbacks, or intrusive thoughts? How do you rate the pain of phantom limb syndrome? How do you describe the way every car backfire sounds like incoming mortar? How do you explain that sometimes you wake up calling for Rodriguez, forgetting he's been dead for months? The bureaucracy was its own kind of warfare. Appeals and denials, medical reviews and rating assessments. I fought for every percentage point, every dollar of compensation. Not because I wanted to be disabled, because I needed to survive. Because the skills that kept me alive in Afghanistan don't translate well to civilian jobs. Because coming home, with PTSD and a prosthetic leg, limits your career options considerably. When the first disability payment appeared in my bank account, I didn't feel grateful. I felt hollow. This money represented everything I'd lost. My career, my body's integrity, my peace of mind, my sense of purpose. It was compensation, not charity. Payment for services rendered, for sacrifices made, for futures altered, and now my own children see it as easy money. Free income for sitting around the house, as Jake put it. They don't understand that every dollar comes with the weight of Rodriguez's death. The phantom pain that wakes me at 3 a.m., the anxiety attacks that make simple tasks feel insurmountable. I set the boots back in the closet but leave the door open. Some things shouldn't be hidden away. Some sacrifices shouldn't be forgotten, especially by the people who benefit from them. The VA investigator wants to meet tomorrow. Agent Rebecca Torres. According to her voicemail, she sounded professional but not unsympathetic, the voice of someone who's dealt with veteran issues before. Part of me hopes she'll tell me this is all a misunderstanding, that there's some other explanation for the missing money, but the boots don't lie. Neither do the bank statements. Neither does the look in Jake's eyes when he called my disability payments unearned income. Some battles you fight for your country, some you fight for your family. The hardest ones are when those two loyalties collide. Agent Rebecca Torres arrives at my door at precisely 9 a.m., her badge catching the morning light like a small piece of armor. She's younger than I expected, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that have seen enough fraudulent paperwork to recognize bullshit from across a room. Her handshake is firm, professional, the grip of someone who's earned respect in a field dominated by men. Mr. Sullivan, thank you for making time to meet with me. She settles into my kitchen chair with the efficient movements of someone who's conducted 1,000 interviews just like this one. I know this situation is difficult. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it. I've been awake since 5 a.m., running scenarios through my head like mission briefings. Best case, this is all a misunderstanding, and my children are innocent. Worst case, my family is about to be destroyed by federal charges. Before we begin, I want you to understand that you're not in trouble, Torres says, opening a manila folder. The VA fraud algorithms flagged unusual account activity, but you're the victim here, not the perpetrator. However, depending on how this investigation proceeds, there may be consequences for the individuals who accessed your account without authorization. My children? Yes. She doesn't sugarcoat it, and I respect that. Sarah Elizabeth Sullivan, age 21, and Jacob Michael Sullivan, age 19. Both have legitimate access to your account based on the documentation we reviewed, but the pattern of withdrawals suggests non-emergency use. Non-emergency use. Government speak for theft. Can you walk me through why you gave them access? Torres pulls out a digital recorder and sets it on the table between us. For the record, I explain about the PTSD episodes, the medication fog, the practical need for someone to handle expenses during my worst periods. She nods, taking notes in a precise shorthand that reminds me of military communications. The flag was triggered by frequency and location data, she continues. 18 withdrawals over 6 months. Always from ATMs near recreational areas, shopping centers, entertainment districts, college campuses. The pattern matches what we call lifestyle funding rather than emergency access. How common is this? Torres closes her pen and looks at me directly. More common than we'd like. Family financial exploitation of disabled veterans is unfortunately widespread. Adult children, spouses, even parents, they see the monthly benefits as supplemental income for the family rather than compensation for the veteran's sacrifice. The word sacrifice lands heavy between us. This woman understands something my children don't. What happens next? That depends partly on you. She leans forward slightly. If you want to pursue charges, we have enough evidence to proceed. Wire, fraud, theft of government benefits, the federal penalties are substantial. Your children could face up to 5 years in prison and significant fines. 5 years. Sarah would be 26 when she got out. Jake would be 20. For their lives, their futures, their opportunities all destroyed. And for what? For $1,800 and some misguided sense of entitlement? If I don't press charges, the case gets referred to VA Financial Crimes for administrative action. They might close the account access, require financial counseling, implement additional security measures, no criminal charges, but also no guarantee this won't happen again. I stare at the recorder, its red light blinking steadily, every word being captured, documented, filed away in some government database. This conversation will follow my family forever, regardless of what decision I make. There's something else, Torres says quietly. During our preliminary investigation, we discovered your son Jacob has significant gambling debts. Online poker? Primarily, we found evidence of debts to individuals with criminal backgrounds, people who don't typically accept payment plans. The air leaves my lungs. How significant? Over $5,000? Based on communications we were able to access legally. The withdrawals from your account correspond with periods when pressure from creditors intensified. Jake isn't just spending my money frivolously. He's using it to stay safe from dangerous people. The theft suddenly becomes more complex, still wrong. Still a violation of trust, but motivated by fear rather than pure greed. What about Sarah? Her involvement appears secondary. Text messages suggest Jacob convinced her to help access the account by claiming financial emergency. She may not have been aware of the gambling situation initially, so my daughter was manipulated by my son into helping him steal from me to pay gambling debts to criminals. The family dysfunction runs deeper than I thought. Torres gathers her papers. I need to tell you that whether you press charges or not, this case has already been opened. Other agencies may become involved, FBI, local law enforcement, possibly your state's attorney general. Once the federal system flags fraud, it doesn't just disappear. How long do I have to decide? About a week. After that, the case moves forward with or without your cooperation. She leaves her card on the table and shows herself out. I sit alone in my kitchen, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. The badge she showed me when she arrived represented authority, consequences, justice, everything I swore to uphold when I took the oath of enlistment, but it also represented the power to destroy my children's lives. I pick up my phone and dial the number for my old friend Tony Rodriguez, no relation to the Rodriguez who died in Afghanistan, just a coincidence that reminds me daily of the cost of service. Tony served 2 tours in Iraq and works as a counselor at the VA now. If anyone understands the weight of this decision, it's him. Tony, it's Marcus. I need some advice, and maybe some help figuring out where I went wrong as a father. The college acceptance letter is still pinned to Sarah's bulletin board in her old bedroom, though she moved out 8 months ago. Northeastern University, her dream school, the place she'd talked about since sophomore year of high school. I remember the day it arrived, how she screamed with joy and threw herself into my arms so hard she nearly knocked me off balance on my prosthetic. "We did it, Daddy," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm going to study psychology and help people like you veterans with PTSD." I helped her move into the dorms that fall, my truck loaded with everything a young woman needs to start her adult life. The tuition bill had made my stomach clench. $48,000 a year, not including room and board. But she'd earned a partial scholarship and I had my disability benefits, and she promised to work part-time to cover expenses. We'd make it work. We always did. What I didn't understand then was how expensive making it work would become. Sarah calls me at 7 p.m., 3 hours after Agent Torres left. Her voice is raw from crying, and she can barely get the words out coherently. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I know what we did was wrong. I know you trusted us, and we broke that trust, and I don't know how to fix it. Come home," I tell her. "We'll talk." She arrives 20 minutes later, still in her work uniform from the campus bookstore where she tries to earn $15 an hour between classes. Her eyes are red and swollen, and she looks smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what she's done. We sit in the living room, the same space where I used to read her bedtime stories when she was small. She curls up in the corner of the couch, knees drawn to her chest like armor against the conversation we need to have. "Tell me how this started," I say gently. "The money ran out in October." Her voice is barely above a whisper. "I had the scholarship, and your help, and my job, but it wasn't enough. Books cost $800 for 1 semester. Lab fees, technology fees, parking permits, everything costs more than they tell you in the brochures." I remember my own financial struggles. At her age, though mine involved military pay and trying to save money for our wedding, different pressures, same desperation. "I tried to make it work," she continues. "I ate peanut butter sandwiches for weeks. I walked everywhere instead of taking the bus. I bought used books when I could find them, tried to share with classmates when I couldn't, but then my laptop died, and I needed it for everything: assignments, research, online classes during COVID precautions. Why didn't you tell me?" She looks up at me with eyes that remind me painfully of her mother. "Because you always seem so stressed about money. You never complain, but I see you checking the bank account multiple times a day. I see you buying generic groceries and putting off doctor's appointments. I didn't want to be another burden. Another burden. The phrase hits me like shrapnel. My daughter, my reason for getting up every morning after her mother died, thinks she's a burden. Jake said you wouldn't notice, she admits. He said the disability payments were automatic, that you had more than enough for just yourself, that we were just borrowing what we'd inherit anyway. Eventually, Jake's in trouble, Sarah, serious trouble. I know about the gambling. The words tumble out in a rush. I found out about a month ago when some guy called the apartment looking for him's scary voice, talking about collection methods and interest rates. That's when I realized this wasn't just about college expenses, but you kept helping him. She nods miserably. He said if I stopped, the people he owed would come after the whole family, that they'd hurt you to get to him. I was scared, Dottie. I didn't know what else to do. Fear. My daughter helped steal from me because she was afraid for my safety. The irony is crushing. She violated my trust to protect me from consequences of her brother's choices. When I was your age, I made mistakes too. I tell her, different mistakes, but mistakes. The difference is, I had the military to teach me. Discipline, accountability, consequences. You've been trying to figure this out on your own. I was going to pay it all back, she says, tears starting again. I got a promotion at work, and I was saving every extra dollar. I had a plan. What about your boyfriend, Brandon, right? What does he think about all this? Her face changes, hardening in a way that reminds me she's not a child anymore. Brandon doesn't know about our family's financial situation, and I intend to keep it that way. He comes from money. His parents pay for his apartment, his car, his spring break trips to Cebu. He wouldn't understand, but I hear what she's not saying. Brandon expects her to keep up with his lifestyle. The expensive dinners, the concerts, the weekend trips to New York City. She's been trying to maintain an image she can't afford, funded by money stolen from her disabled father. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The VA investigator told me that you and Jake could face federal charges. Prison time. This isn't just a family problem anymore, it's a legal problem. She goes very still. How much prison time? Up to 5 years. The number hangs in the air between us like smoke from an explosion. 5 years of her life, her early 20s. The time when most people are launching careers and building relationships and figuring out who they want to be. Gone. I'll drop out, she says suddenly. I'll leave school, get a full-time job, pay back every penny with interest. I'll do whatever you want. It's not about what I want anymore. It's about what the law requires. We sit in silence for a long time. Outside, I can hear kids playing in the street, the sound of normal family life, continuing while ours falls apart. Sarah stares at her hands, probably calculating how many hours, at $15 an hour, it would take to repay $1,800, not realizing that restitution might not be enough to avoid prosecution. Daddy? Her voice is small again, the voice of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Yeah, sweetheart, do you hate me? The question breaks something inside my chest. I move to the couch and pull her into a hug, feeling how thin she's gotten, how the stress of school and work and guilt has worn her down to almost nothing. I could never hate you, I whisper into her hair. Disappointed, angry, hurt, yes. But hate, never. What happens now? I think about Agent Torres's badge, about the legal machinery already grinding into motion, about the choice between justice and mercy that keeps soldiers awake at night. Now we figure out how to clean up this mess together. The gambling debt notice arrived at Jake's apartment 3 days ago, according to the timestamp on the photo he finally shows me. Bold red letters demanding immediate payment of $5,247 to Mountain West Collections, with a phone number and a thinly veiled threat about alternative collection methods if payment isn't received within 72 hours. They're not actually debt collectors, Jake explains, fidgeting with his phone case in my kitchen. It's past midnight, and he showed up at my door looking like he hadn't slept in days. They're just guys Tony Messina hired to collect what I owe him. Tony Messina? The name means nothing to me, but Jake's face when he says it tells me everything. I need to know about the kind of person who loans money to 19-year-old college students at predatory rates. How did this start, I ask, though I suspect I already know. Jake was always drawn to risk, even as a child. The kid who climbed the highest trees, who rode his bike too fast down steep hills, who couldn't resist the dare that every other kid knew was dangerous. Online poker, he admits. Started small, just $20 tournaments while I was bored during COVID lock. I was good at it, truly good. Won $800 my first month. Of course he did. Gambling addiction never starts with losing. I thought I had a system, he continues. Mathematical probability, reading tells through betting patterns, bankroll management. I read books about it, watched YouTube videos. I was treating it like a business. Until you weren't. He runs his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it makes my chest ache. I used to do the same thing when I was his age, when stress and pressure made me feel like crawling out of my own skin. The stakes got higher. Had to, if I wanted to make real money. Started playing cash games instead of tournaments, moved up from $20 buy-ins to 50, then 100. When I was winning, it felt like I'd figured out life, like I'd never have to worry about money again. But you weren't always winning. The losing streaks got longer, bigger losses, longer recovery periods. I started playing on tilt angry, desperate, making stupid bets to chase losses. Classic rookie mistakes that I knew better than to make. He shows me his phone, scrolling through screenshots of his account history. Win, lows, win, lows, win end, then a catastrophic string of losses that wiped out months of careful gains in a single weekend. I lost $4,000 in one night, he whispers. 4 months of winnings, gone. I couldn't stop playing, kept telling myself the next hand would turn it around, that my luck was about to change. I know that feeling, though my version involved different stakes. The gambler's fallacy applies to more than card set, applies to military missions where you convince yourself that the next patrol will be the safe one, that your luck can't run bad forever. Sometimes it can. So you borrowed money. Tony Messina runs games out of a warehouse near downtown. Real money, serious players. He offered to stake me front me the money to buy into bigger games in exchange for 60% of my winnings. What happens if you lose? Jake's laugh is hollow. You owe him the stake plus 20% interest, compounded weekly. The mathematics are brutal. Loan shark economics designed to trap desperate people in cycles of debt they can never escape. And my son walked into it willingly. I convinced myself I could handle it, he continues. Pay him back quickly. Get ahead. Maybe even quit school and play professionally. Seemed like a better career path than my communications degree. Instead, you lost. Instead, I lost. Big, the kind of loss that makes you understand why people jump off bridges. The casual reference to suicide chills me. I've lost too many fellow veterans to that particular solution to ever treat it lightly. That's when you started taking money from my account. He nods. Tony's not patient about repayment. He sent some guys to my apartment to explain the collection process. They were very thorough in their explanation. I noticed the bruise on his forearm now, yellow-green and fading. Evidence of Tony's educational methods. I told Sarah you needed money for medical expenses, he admits. Said you were too proud to ask directly, that the VA wasn't covering everything. She believed me because she loves you and wants to help. So you used her love against both of us. I used her love to protect all of us. Tony made it clear that family members aren't off limits when it comes to collecting debts. I couldn't let them hurt you or Sarah because of my mistakes, but you could let us be accessories to theft. He flinches at the word accessories, and I see the first crack in his defensive facade. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. Win enough to pay Tony back, replace the money I took from you, get Sarah out of it clean. How much do you still owe him, with interest and penalties? About $6,000 now. $6,000, more than 3 months of my disability payments. Money I don't have, can't raise, wouldn't give him if I could. The hole he's dug is too deep for my shovel. Jake, the VA knows about the withdrawals. There's a federal investigator involved. This isn't a family matter anymore, it's a criminal case. His face goes ashen. What kind of criminal case? Wire fraud? Theft of government benefits? You and Sarah could face federal prison time. How much time? Up to 5 years. He sits in silence for a long moment, processing the weight of consequences he never considered. When you're 19 and invincible, federal prison doesn't feel like a real possibility. When you're 19 and facing Tony Messina's collection methods, 5 years probably feels like a reasonable trade-off. There's something else. I continue. Agent Torres told me that once a case like this gets flagged, other agencies get involved. FBI, state police, local law enforcement. They're going to investigate Tony Messina and his operation. When they do, they'll find out about the threats, the violence, the whole illegal gambling enterprise. Which means Tony will know I talked to federal agents. Which means you're in danger either way. Jake puts his head in his hands, and for a moment he looks like the little boy who used to ask me to check his closet for monsters before bedtime. The irony is that this time, the monsters are real, and I can't chase them away with a flashlight and a hug. I'm sorry, Dad. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this bad. I know you didn't, but intentions don't matter. None, only actions matter. What am I supposed to do? If I cooperate with the feds, Tony kills me. If I don't cooperate, the government sends me to prison. Either way, Sarah gets dragged down with me. It's a tactical problem, the kind of no-win scenario that military strategists spend careers trying to avoid. Every option involves casualties. Every choice requires sacrifice. There might be a third option, I tell him, but it requires you to trust me completely, and it requires you to follow orders without question. Can you do that? He looks up at me with eyes that remind me painfully of his mother, the same blue-gray color, the same mixture of hope and fear when facing impossible odds. Yes, sir. The military formality in his voice catches me off guard. He hasn't called me sir since he was 12 years old and angry about some punishment I'd imposed. But there's no sarcasm in it now, only desperate respect. First, you're going to write down everything, every game, every bet, every conversation with Tony Messina and his people. Names, dates, amounts, locations, Everything you can remember. He'll kill me if he finds out I'm talking to cops. He'll kill you anyway if you can't pay him. At least this way, you might take him down with you. Jake nods slowly, understanding the mathematics of survival in a way that reminds me he's more my son than I sometimes give him credit for. Second, you're going to move back home immediately. Tonight. Pack whatever you need and get out of that apartment before morning. What about Sarah? Leave Sarah to me. Your job is to stay alive long enough for the law to deal with Tony Messina, and if the law doesn't deal with him fast enough, I look at my son, really look at him and see myself at 19, cocky and stupid and convinced that rules were suggestions rather than requirements. The difference is that I had drill sergeants to beat the stupidity out of me before it killed me. Jake had to learn the hard way that actions have consequences, that some mistakes can't be undone, that sometimes the only choice is between bad and worse. Then we figure out how to live with the consequences of our choices. I tell him. Together. The challenge coin sits heavy in my palm, its bronze surface worn smooth by 20 years of handling. 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. My unit, my brothers, my family before I had a family. Tony Rodriguez gave it to me during my retirement ceremony, a token of brotherhood that transcends civilian understanding. Keep this close, he'd said, pressing it into my hand as we stood in the chapel where too many flag-draped coffins had passed through. When the world doesn't make sense, remember that you've got brothers who understand. The world definitely doesn't make sense right now. I find Tony at the VFW nursing a beer and watching a baseball game he clearly doesn't care about. At 51, he's 3 years older than me but looks 10 years younger, the benefit of coming home with all his limbs intact and his brain chemistry mostly unchanged. Iraq was brutal for him, but not in the same way Afghanistan was brutal for me. Marcus, he stands and embraces me, the kind of hug that says everything about military brotherhood, without needing words. You sounded rough on the phone. What's going on? I order a Coke, can't drink alcohol with my medication, and settle into the booth across from him. The VFW is nearly empty on a Tuesday afternoon. Just a few older veterans playing pool and complaining about the government, our kind of place. My kids stole money from me, I say without preamble. Federal investigation, possible charges, the whole mess. Tony sets down his beer and gives me his full attention. This is what I love about military brotherhood. No judgment, no platitudes, just the willingness to engage with whatever crisis you bring to the table. How much money? $1,800 over 6 months. Not enough to ruin me, but enough to trigger VA fraud algorithms. Why did they take it? I explain about Jake's gambling debts and Sarah's college expenses, about the loan sharks and the federal investigators and the impossible choice between protecting my children and pursuing justice. Tony listens without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. You know this isn't uncommon, right? He says when I finish. I see this kind of thing at the VA all the time. Family financial exploitation of disabled veterans. Kids, spouses, parents, they all convince themselves that disability payments are family income rather than compensation for individual sacrifice. How? Do you handle it when you see it? Depends on the situation. Sometimes it's genuine misunderstanding families that don't realize taking veteran benefits without permission is federal theft. Sometimes it's malicious exploitation. Most of the time it's somewhere in between. What category do my kids fall into? Tony considers this, swirling his beer thoughtfully. Based on what you've told me, Jake falls into the malicious category. He knew what he was doing was wrong and did it anyway. Sarah falls into the misunderstanding category. She was manipulated by someone she trusted. The federal prosecutor won't see those distinctions. Maybe not, but a judge might, if it comes to that. The baseball game drones on in the background. Cardinals versus Cubs. Neither team playing particularly well. I used to love baseball, the strategy, the statistics, the way individual excellence contributed to team success. Now it just reminds me of summer evenings with my kids when they were young, before everything got complicated. Tell me about the VA counseling programs. I say for families. We've got several options. Financial counseling for veterans struggling with money management. Family therapy for veterans dealing with relationship issues related to their service. Addiction counseling for veterans who develop substance abuse problems. What about for families of veterans who commit crimes? Tony raises an eyebrow. That's more specialized. Not many programs specifically designed for that situation, but there are programs. Some, mostly through the court system, diversion programs, rehabilitation instead of incarceration, community service combined with counseling. The VA sometimes coordinates with federal prosecutors on cases involving veteran families. This is what I came here hoping to hear, that there might be alternatives to simply watching my children face federal charges. Not get-outs of jail-free cards, but pathways to accountability that don't involve destroying their futures. What would you do, I ask, if these were your kids? Tony finishes his beer and signals the bartender for another. Honestly, I'd let the system run its course. Your kids made adult decisions that have adult consequences. Protecting them from those consequences doesn't help them learn, and it doesn't help other veteran families avoid similar situations, even if it means prison time. Even if it means prison time. Marcus, you served 3 tours in Afghanistan. You lost a leg and nearly lost your mind serving this country. The disability payments you receive aren't charity, they're compensation for sacrifice. Your kids treating that money like a family slush fund is an insult to every veteran who's ever been wounded in service. His words hit hard because they're true. I've been so focused on protecting my children that I've lost sight of what my disability benefits actually represent, not just my financial security, but recognition of service and sacrifice that extends beyond my individual situation. But they're still my kids. Of course they are. And part of being a good father is letting them face the consequences of their actions. That's how kids become adults, by learning that choices matter. The pool players in the corner erupt in laughter over some joke I can't hear. Normal veteran camaraderie, the kind of easy friendship that develops between people who've shared extreme experiences. I envy their lightness, their ability to find humor in ordinary moments. There's something else, Tony says quietly. Something. I need you to consider how many other veteran families are dealing with this same situation. How many disabled veterans are being exploited by family members who think disability benefits are free money? Your case might be the one that sets precedent, that establishes consequences, that protects other veterans from similar exploitation. I hadn't considered that angle, that my personal family crisis might have implications for the broader veteran community, that pursuing justice for myself might protect other veterans from facing similar betrayals. The VA takes this stuff seriously, because it has to, Tony continues. Every dollar stolen from veteran benefits is a dollar that doesn't go to someone who earned it through service and sacrifice. It's bigger than just your family. The challenge coin grows warm in my palm, and I think about the weight of responsibility. It represents not just to my unit or my family, but to the broader community of veterans who depend on the integrity of the system we all served to protect. Thanks for listening, I tell Tony as we prepare to leave. That's what brothers are for. But Marcus, whatever you decide, make sure you can live with it 10 years from now. Make sure it's a decision that honors your service and your sacrifice, not just your love for your kids. The federal warrant sits on Agent Torres's desk like a loaded weapon. Official government letterhead, bearing the weight of consequences my children never imagined when they first accessed my account. The document is surprisingly simple. A few pages of legal language that could destroy 2 young lives. United States of America v. Sarah Elizabeth Sullivan and Jacob Michael Sullivan. Torres reads from the header. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, theft of government benefits, and violation of federal banking regulations. We're in her office at the VA building downtown. A sterile space decorated with government-issued furniture and motivational posters about integrity and service. Through the window, I can see normal people living normal lives, commuting to work, grabbing coffee, probably not contemplating whether to sign documents that will send their children to federal prison. The grand jury voted to indict yesterday, Torres continues. Based on the evidence we've gathered, bank records, ATM surveillance footage, digital communications between your children, there's sufficient probable cause to proceed with criminal charges. Sufficient probable cause. Legal terminology that reduces my family's destruction to procedural requirements. What exactly does that mean for them? Torres opens a thick folder and spreads several documents across her desk. Sarah faces 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. Maximum penalty is 15 years in federal prison plus substantial fines. Jacob faces the same charges plus an additional count related to his gambling activities using proceeds from fraud to fund illegal gambling operations. How is that different from regular gambling? When you use stolen federal benefits to fund gambling activities, it becomes a federal offense under the RICO statutes. The government takes a dim view of people who steal veteran disability payments to play poker. RICO statutes, organized crime legislation being applied to my 19-year-old son's stupid decisions. The federal government doesn't just want to prosecute Jake, they want to make an example of him. There's more, Torres says. During our investigation into Jacob's gambling activities, we discovered connections to a broader criminal enterprise. Tony Messina runs illegal gambling operations, with suspected ties to money laundering and loan sharking. Your son's case has provided federal prosecutors with evidence they've been seeking for months. Meaning what? Meaning Jacob could be a key witness in a much larger case. If he cooperates with federal investigators, provides testimony about Messina's operations, the charges against him could be significantly reduced. Cooperation. The federal government wants to use my son as bait to catch bigger fish. In return, they'll consider not destroying his life completely. What about Sarah? Her situation is different. She appears to have been manipulated into participating, and her role was secondary. If she demonstrates genuine remorse, agrees to make full restitution, and cooperates with financial counseling, prosecutors might consider a plea agreement. What kind of plea agreement? Probation instead of prison time. Community service, continued. Financial counseling, close supervision but not incarceration. I study the warrant, trying to understand how we got here. 6 months ago, my biggest worry was making sure Jake was keeping up with his grades and Sarah was eating enough vegetables. Now I'm discussing plea agreements and federal cooperation in a government office that smells like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. There's something else you need to understand, Torres says. Once these warrants are executed, the case moves beyond VA jurisdiction. FBI will handle the arrests, federal prosecutors will handle the charges, and federal judges will handle the sentencing. I won't have any influence over the process. When will they be arrested? Within 48 hours. Federal marshals will serve the warrants at their known addresses: Sarah's apartment and Jacob's new address, which I understand is your home. Jake moved back yesterday, carrying 2 duffel bags and a haunted expression that reminded me of soldiers. Returning from deployment, he's sleeping in his old room, jumping at every car door that slams in the street, checking his phone constantly for messages from Tony Messina's people. Is there any way to avoid this? Torres leans back in her chair, and for the first time since I've known her, she looks genuinely sympathetic rather than professionally distant. Mr. Sullivan, I want you to understand something. This case was flagged by automated systems. The evidence was gathered by computer algorithms. The grand jury voted based on documentation that doesn't lie or have feelings or care about family relationships. But you're human. The prosecutors are human. Someone somewhere has discretion. Very limited discretion. Federal prosecutors don't like to lose cases, and this one is what we call a slam dunk. Clear evidence, obvious crimes, sympathetic victims, you and other veterans whose benefits are threatened by this kind of exploitation. So my children are going to prison, probably, unless they provide value to federal investigators that outweighs the value of prosecuting them. Value like testifying against Tony Messina. Exactly like testifying against Tony Messina. I think about my son, barely 19 years old, being asked to wear a wire or testify in federal court against dangerous criminals. I think about my daughter trying to focus on her psychology studies while facing the possibility of federal prison. I think about the cost of their poor choices extending far beyond the $1,800 they stole. What would you do? I asked Torres. If these were your children. She's quiet for a long moment, organizing the papers on her desk with unnecessary precision. I'd hire the best criminal defense attorney I could afford and prepare for a long, expensive legal battle. I'd also start planning for the possibility that my children's lives are about to change dramatically. Any recommendations for attorneys? She slides a business card across the desk. Patricia Chen, former federal prosecutor now in private practice. She specializes in cases like this and has a good relationship with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I pocket the card. Another piece of official paperwork that represents my family's new reality. How much will this cost? Probably more than you can afford on disability benefits alone. But Ms. Chen sometimes takes cases pro bono for veterans and their families. Sometimes, probably, maybe, the language of hope when there isn't much hope. To offer. Torres walks me to the elevator, and we shake hands formally. Mr. Sullivan, I want you to know that investigating cases like this is never easy. You served your country with honor, and you deserve better than being exploited by your own family. They're not bad kids, I tell her. They just made bad choices. No, but sometimes bad choices have consequences that extend beyond the people who made them. The elevator doors close, and I'm alone with my reflection in the polished steel. A tired-looking man in his 40s, wearing civilian clothes, but still carrying himself like a soldier. In 48 hours, federal marshals will knock on my door to arrest my children. After that, everything changes. I pull out my phone and dial Patricia Chen's office. Time to find out how much justice costs, and whether I can afford it. The wedding photo sits on my bedside table. 23 years old and slightly faded, but still capturing the moment when everything seemed possible. Linda in her simple white dress, me in my dress blues. Both of us young and stupid, and convinced we could handle anything life threw at us. We were 22 and 21 respectively. Barely adults ourselves, but planning to build a family together. We had no idea what we were signing up for. Sarah finds me staring at it when she comes to check on me after dinner. She's been staying at the house since the warrant discussion, afraid to be alone at her apartment, afraid to go to class, afraid of what happens when the federal marshals come knocking. You look so young, she says, settling on the edge of my bed. Was Mom really that happy? She was terrified, I admit. We both were. Marriage is scary enough without adding military deployments and uncertain futures, but you looked happy. We were terrified and happy and completely unprepared for what came next. Sarah picks up the frame, studying her mother's face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize details. She was only 12 when Linda died. Old enough to remember, but not old enough to understand the complexities of adult relationships. Tell me about her, she says. The real her, not just the perfect mother version you usually talk about. I've spent 8 years protecting my children from the harder truths about their mother, focusing on Linda's strengths while glossing over her struggles. But facing federal charges has a way of stripping away comfortable illusions. Your mother was brilliant, I begin, but she was also stubborn as hell. When she decided something was right, she'd fight for it, even when she was obviously wrong. Especially when she was obviously wrong. Like what? Like insisting we could Afford a house we couldn't afford because she wanted you kids to have a yard. Like refusing to let me re-enlist for a fourth tour because she said the family needed me more than the Marines did. Like spending our emergency fund on Jake's baseball equipment because she believed supporting your interests was more important than financial security. Sarah smiles at this, probably recognizing the source of her own stubborn streak. She sounds like a good mom. She was a good mom. But she was also human, which meant she made mistakes. Big ones, sometimes. What kind of mistakes? I consider how much truth a 21-year-old facing federal charges can handle. Then I remember that Sarah's adult enough to steal federal benefits, so she's adult enough to hear about the realities of marriage and parenthood. Money was always a problem, I tell her. Military pay isn't great, especially for enlisted guys with families. Your mom came from a middle-class background where money problems got solved by borrowing from parents or using credit cards. She never really understood that we didn't have those safety nets, so she spent money you didn't have. She spent money on you kids that we couldn't afford to spend, birthday parties that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, Christmas presents that required 6 months of credit card payments, summer camps, and sports equipment and school clothes that made our bank account look like yours probably does right now. Sarah winces at the comparison, understanding the financial stress she's been trying to navigate. After my first deployment, I came home to find out we owed $8,000 in credit card debt, $8,000 on a corporal's salary. It nearly destroyed our marriage. What did you do? We fought a lot. About money, about priorities, about whether loving your children means giving them everything they want or teaching them the value of things. Your mom thought I was being selfish, hoarding money instead of investing in our family's happiness. I thought she was being irresponsible, creating financial problems that would hurt all of us eventually. Who was right? We both were, and we were both wrong. That's the thing about marriage. Most fights aren't about who's right, they're about two people with different values trying to build a life together. Sarah sets the picture down and looks at me directly. Is that why you're so stressed about money now? Because of what happened with Mom? The question hits deeper than I expected. Partly, losing your mom to cancer was expensive medical bills, missed work, funeral costs. The life insurance helped, but not enough. And then raising 2 teenagers alone on disability benefits. Let's just say I learned to be very careful with money. We made it worse. You made it complicated. There's a difference. She's quiet for a moment, processing information that reframes her understanding of our family's financial situation. I can see her connecting dots, my reluctance to discuss money, my stress about unexpected expenses, my anger about the stolen disability payments. Did we remind you of Mom? She asks quietly. When we spent your money, you reminded me of me, I tell her. When I was your age, and thought I was invincible, and convinced that consequences were things that happened to other people, but you had the military to straighten you out. I had drill sergeants who yelled at me until I learned discipline. You had me, and apparently I wasn't as good at teaching those lessons. You were grieving, Mom, and dealing with your injuries, and trying to work while raising 2 kids. Cut yourself some slack. It's strange to hear parenting advice from my daughter, but she's not wrong. The years after Linda's death were survival mode, getting through each day, making sure the kids were fed and clothed and attended school regularly. I didn't have energy for deeper conversations about values and consequences and financial responsibility. Jake was angry after Mom died. Sarah continues. Angry at God, angry at cancer, angry at you for not being able to fix it. I think that gambling was his way of feeling like he had control over something. And your college spending? My way of trying to prove I was worth the investment. That losing Mom and your leg wasn't for nothing if I could become something special. We sit in comfortable silence, to people who love each other, trying to understand how good intentions led to federal charges. Outside, I can hear Jake on the phone with someone, probably the attorney we're meeting with tomorrow. Dad. Sarah's voice is small again, the voice of a child seeking reassurance from the adult who's supposed to have answers. Yeah, are you? Disappointed in who we turned out to be. I look at the wedding photo, at the young couple who thought love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. Then I look at my daughter, who's made serious mistakes but is trying to understand them too, learn from them, to become better. I'm disappointed in the choices you made, I tell her, but I'm not disappointed in who you are. You're your mother's daughter, stubborn and generous and willing to fight for what you believe in. You just need to learn to fight for the right things. What are the right things? Integrity, accountability, taking care of the people who take care of you, understanding that actions have consequences, and that love means accepting those consequences together. She nods, and I see Linda in her expression, the same determination, the same willingness to face hard truths when facing them becomes necessary. We're going to get through this, I tell her, all of us, but we're going to do it honestly, with full accountability for what we've done. No more secrets, no more rationalizations, no more easy answers, even if it means prison. Even if it means prison, because the alternative, living with lies and avoiding consequences, isn't really living at all. My military discharge papers rest on the kitchen table like a constitution for this family meeting. The official document that transformed me from active duty Marine to disabled veteran 8 years ago. Honorable discharge and Purple Heart. Recipient and 100% service-connected disability, words that represent sacrifice, duty, and consequences. Patricia Chen sits across from me, her briefcase open and legal pads arranged with military precision. She's younger than I expected but carries herself with the confidence of someone who's argued cases in federal court and won. Sarah and Jake flank me on either side, both of them pale and subdued after spending the morning reviewing federal sentencing guidelines. Before we begin, Chen says, I want everyone to understand where we stand legally. The federal prosecutors have what they consider an airtight case. Bank records, ATM footage, digital communications, the evidence is overwhelming. Jake shifts, uncomfortably in his chair. He's been living at home for 3 days now, barely sleeping, jumping at every unexpected sound. The stress of waiting for arrest has aged him years and hours. However, Chen continues. Federal prosecutors are also pragmatic. They're interested in cooperation, especially regarding the broader criminal enterprise that Jacob became involved with. Tony Messina. I say Tony Messina and Associates. The FBI has been investigating his operation for 18 months. Jacob's case provides them with an insider perspective they haven't had before. Sarah speaks for the first time since we sat down. What does cooperation mean exactly? It means Jacob would work with federal investigators to gather evidence about Messina's gambling operations, loan sharking activities, and money laundering schemes, potentially wearing recording devices, participating in controlled interactions, testifying before grand juries. That sounds dangerous, I observe. It is dangerous, Chen acknowledges, but it's also Jacob's best chance of avoiding significant prison time. She opens her briefcase and withdraws a thick folder. I've prepared cooperation agreements for both of you to review. Jacob, your cooperation could reduce your sentence from 15 years to possibly 2 years, served in minimum security. Sarah, full cooperation plus restitution could result in probation instead of incarceration. 2 years versus 15 years, probation versus federal prison. The mathematics of justice reduced to bargaining power and prosecutorial discretion. What about restitution? I ask. Full repayment of the $1,847, plus interest and penalties. Approximately $20 total. $2,500, that might as well be $25,000 given my children's current financial situation. There's something else, Chen says. The prosecutors want to know about your intentions regarding civil action. Civil action? You could sue your children for damages beyond the stolen money, emotional distress, legal fees, impact on your credit, and VA benefits. The federal case would support any civil claims you chose to pursue. I look at my children, both of them, staring at the table as if it holds answers to questions they're afraid to ask. Sue my own kids, add financial ruin to criminal charges, ensure they spend their entire young adult lives paying for 6 months of poor decisions. I won't be pursuing civil action, I tell Chen. Relief flickers across Sarah's face, but Jake remains stone-faced. He understands that cooperation with federal investigators carries risks that extend beyond courtrooms and sentencing guidelines. Jake, I say, using the command voice that still works after all these years. Look at me. He raises his eyes reluctantly, and I see fear there genuine. Adult fear of consequences that can't be fixed with apologies or promises to do better. I need you to understand something, I continue. The money you stole represents more than just financial loss. It represents trust broken, family bonds damaged, and disrespect for the sacrifice that disability payments represent. I know that. Let me finish. The discharge papers catch the overhead light. Official seals and signatures that represent 20 years of honorable service. These papers document my commitment to duty, honor, and country. Values that cost me a leg and nearly cost me my sanity. Values that your actions have dishonored. Dead eye. But they also document my commitment to my family. 2 raising children who understand right from wrong, who face consequences for their actions, who become adults capable of taking responsibility for their mistakes. I reach across the table and place my hand over the cooperation agreement. This document represents your chance to honor those values, to take responsibility, face consequences, and help prevent other people from being victimized by Tony Messina's operation. It also represents the chance of getting killed by gangsters, Jake mutters. Yes, it does. Just like my deployment orders represented the chance of getting killed by insurgents, but some things are worth the risk. Sarah looks between us, understanding that this conversation is about more than legal strategy. What if Jake cooperates and something happens to him? Then we deal with that consequence together, I tell her. As a family. Chen interrupts our family moment with practiced legal efficiency. I need decisions today. The federal prosecutors want cooperation agreements signed before the arrest warrants are executed? When will that happen? Tomorrow morning? Federal marshals will serve warrants at 6 a.m. unless cooperation agreements are in place. 6 a.m., less than 18 hours to decide whether my children face immediate arrest or enter into agreements. that could protect them from the worst consequences while exposing them to different dangers. Jake straightens in his chair, and for the first time in days, he looks like the young man I raised rather than the scared kid he's become. If I cooperate, what happens to Sarah? Her case becomes much simpler, Chen explains. Secondary role, manipulation by family member, cooperation with authorities, full restitution, all factors that support minimal sentencing. Probation, very likely probation. Jake nods slowly, processing the mathematics of sacrifice. Save his sister by risking his own safety. Take responsibility for his choices by helping federal investigators take down the criminals who exploited his desperation. I'll do it, he says quietly. Jake, you don't have to, Sarah starts. Yeah, I do. He looks at me directly, and I see something new in his expression, resolve that reminds me of Marines preparing for dangerous missions. Dad's right. Some things are worth the risk. Chen begins arranging paperwork with practiced efficiency. I'll need to make some calls, arrange meetings with federal prosecutors, coordinate with FBI handlers. This needs to be finalized by morning. What about Sarah, I ask. Sarah signs a cooperation agreement acknowledging her secondary role and agreeing to full restitution. Much simpler process. We spend the next hour reviewing documents, signing papers, and transforming my children from defendants into government witnesses. Chen explains procedures, safety protocols, and legal protections. Jake asks surprisingly sophisticated questions about evidence gathering and trial testimony. As we prepare to leave, Chen pulls me aside. Mr. Sullivan, I want you to understand that this process will be difficult for your family. Cooperation cases take months or years to resolve. Your son will be under significant stress, and there are no guarantees about outcomes. Are you saying this is a mistake? I'm saying that sometimes the right choice is also the hardest choice. Your children are lucky to have a father who understands duty and sacrifice. I look at the discharge papers, still spread on the table where we left them. 20 years of service documented in official language that can't capture the real cost of duty, the friendships lost, the innocence sacrificed, the way serving something larger than yourself changes you permanently. They're learning, I tell Chen. Sometimes the hard way is the only way. The rehabilitation program brochure sits on Sarah's nightstand. Colorful pages promising financial responsibility and family healing in bold letters across the cover. It's part of her cooperation agreement, mandatory counseling that addresses both the practical and psychological aspects of financial crime within families. I thought therapy would be more comfortable, Sarah says, settling into the passenger seat of my truck after her first session. Dr. Martinez doesn't let you hide from anything. Good therapists usually don't. We're driving to her new job position at a local accounting firm that pays $12 an hour and requires her to work 25 hours per week while maintaining her course load. It's part of her restitution plan, every paycheck going toward repaying the money she helped steal from me. She asked me to write a letter to you, Sarah continues, explaining how I justified taking the money, what I told myself to make it seem. Okay, are you going to show it to me? Do you want to read it? I consider this as we stop at a red light. Part of me wants to understand Sarah's thought process, to know exactly how she rationalized stealing from her disabled father. Another part of me would rather focus on moving forward than relitigating the past. Only if you think it would help you, I tell her. I think it might help both of us. The accounting firm is in a strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop, the kind of small business that handles tax preparation and bookkeeping for other small businesses. Sarah's supervisor is a woman named Janet who agreed to hire her despite the pending federal case apparently. Federal prosecutors recommended her as someone who would benefit from hands-on financial education. I'll pick you up at 6, I tell Sarah as she gathers her purse and the notebook she uses for tracking her restitution payments. Dad. She pauses with her hand on the door handle. Thank you for not giving up on me. I couldn't give up on you if I tried. The drive home gives me time to think about the changes in my daughter over the past month. She transferred from the expensive private university to the local community college, cutting her educational costs by 70%. She broke up with Brandon, the wealthy boyfriend who never understood why she couldn't afford to keep up with his lifestyle. She moved back home to save money and focus on rebuilding trust with our family. Most importantly, she stopped making excuses. The letter she mentioned is waiting on my dresser when I get home. 3 pages of careful handwriting that represents more emotional honesty than we've shared in years. Dear Dad, it begins. Dr. Martinez says I need to take full responsibility for my choices without blaming circumstances or other people. This is harder than I thought it would be. I settle into my reading chair, the same spot where I used to grade her homework when she was in elementary school. I told myself that taking money from your account wasn't really stealing because we're family, and families share resources. I convinced myself that you had more than enough money because your disability payments seemed automatic and reliable. I rationalized that you wouldn't miss small amounts because you weren't paying attention to every transaction. The honesty is brutal but necessary. Sarah's letter documents exactly how financial exploitation happens through small rationalizations that build into major violations of trust. I also told myself that I was more deserving of the money because I was working toward a future, while you were just collecting disability. I'm ashamed to write that, but Dr. Martinez says shame without honesty isn't helpful. There it is, the ugly truth about how my children viewed my disability benefits. Not as compensation for military service and sacrifice, but as unearned income that I didn't really deserve. When Jake asked me to help him access the account, I said yes, partly because I was already taking money for my own expenses, so it felt hypocritical to refuse him. But mostly, I said yes because I was scared of what would happen to our family if his gambling debts got him hurt or killed. Sarah's letter goes on to detail the progression of lies she told herself, the way small ethical compromises led to larger violations of trust. She explains how financial pressure at school made her feel desperate, how watching wealthy classmates spend money freely made her feel entitled to more resources, how the stress of maintaining appearances while struggling financially affected her judgment. The hardest part isn't apologizing for taking the money, she writes near the end. The hardest part is apologizing for disrespecting your sacrifice and treating your disability payments like family income instead of compensation for what you lost serving our country. I set the letter down and look out the window, watching normal suburban life continue while my family rebuilds itself from the ground up. A neighbor is mowing his lawn. Kids are riding bikes in the streets. The world keeps turning even when your personal world falls apart. My phone buzzes with a text from Sarah. Did you read it? Yes, I reply. Thank you for being honest. Was it too much? It was exactly what I needed to hear. 3 dots appear and disappear several times before her next message arrives. I love you. Dad, I'm going to make this right. I know you are. When I pick her up at 6, Sarah looks tired but purposeful. She's wearing the professional clothes we bought at Goodwill, a navy blue blazer and black slacks that make her look older, more serious about life than she did 6 months ago. How was your first day? Educational, she says, buckling her seatbelt. Janet has me reviewing accounts for small business owners who are behind on their bookkeeping, seeing how financial problems cascade when people don't pay attention to details. Learning anything useful, learning that money problems are usually symptom problems, not root problems. The businesses that are struggling financially are usually struggling with organization, planning, or decision-making. The money issues are just where the problems show up first. It's an insight that applies to more than just business bookkeeping, and I suspect Sarah understands that. Dr. Martinez wants to meet with you next week, she says as we pull into our driveway. Family session to discuss rebuilding trust and establishing new communication patterns. Are you ready for that? I think so. Are you? I look at my daughter, really look at her, and see someone different from the college student who thought she was entitled to easy answers and other people's money. This version of Sarah understands consequences, takes responsibility for her choices, and works actively to repair the damage she's caused. Yeah, I tell her, I think I'm ready. The Addiction Treatment Center card sits untouched on Jake's dresser for 3 days. Bright blue lettering, advertising, gambling, recovery support, and family healing programs. Every time I walk past his room, I see it there, a lifeline he refuses to grab. I don't need gambling addiction treatment, Jake insists during our latest argument about his cooperation agreement requirements. I need Tony Messina to disappear, so I can get my life back. Your life was gambling away college money and stealing from your disabled father. You sure you want that back? He's been living at home for 2 weeks now, sleeping fitfully and emerging from his room only for meals and meetings with federal investigators. The FBI wants him to record conversations with Messina's associates, gather evidence about the broader criminal enterprise, potentially testify before a grand jury. Jake agreed to cooperate, but he's resisting every aspect of recovery. The addiction counseling isn't optional, I remind him. It's part of your cooperation agreement. It's bullshit, he snaps, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. I can control my gambling. I just got in over my head with the wrong people. Son, you lost $5,000. You didn't have 2 criminals who threatened to hurt your family. That's not getting in over your head, that's addiction. It's bad luck. The denial is so complete it's almost admirable. Jake has constructed an elaborate mental framework where he's the victim of circumstances rather than someone who made destructive choices repeatedly over months. In his version of events, he was just an unlucky poker player who happened to borrow money from the wrong people. The FBI called, I tell him. They want you to meet with Agent Rodriguez tomorrow about wearing a wire. Jake stops pacing. A wire recording device. They want you to have a conversation with one of Messina's guys while recording everything he says. That's insane. If they find out, you're dead. If you don't cooperate, you're going to federal prison for 15 years. Those are your choices. Jake slumps into a chair, the weight of impossible decisions finally registering. For the first time since this whole mess started, he looks like the 19-year-old kid he actually is rather than the street-smart adult he's been pretending to be. I can't do this, he whispers. Yes, you can, but not alone. I sit across from him, the same kitchen table where we've had a dozen versions of this conversation over the past 2 weeks. The addiction counseling isn't punishment, Jake. It's preparation. You need to understand why you made these choices before you can avoid making them again. I told you it was just bad luck. Bad luck doesn't make you lie to your sister about needing money for my medical expenses. Bad luck doesn't make you steal from your father's disability account 18 times over 6 months. Bad luck doesn't make you borrow money from criminals. At 20% weekly interest, each point hits like a physical blow, and I watch Jake's defensive facade crumble, piece by piece. He's been avoiding the addiction treatment center because accepting help means accepting that he has a problem. And accepting that he has a problem means acknowledging that his choices weren't just unlucky, they were compulsive and destructive. What if the counseling doesn't work? He asks quietly. What if it does? What if I can't stop gambling? Then we figure out how to manage that challenge together. But we can't manage what we don't acknowledge. Jake is quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands like they belong to someone else. When he speaks again, his voice is barely audible. I think about it all the time. Gambling? Even now, with everything that's happened, I think about finding a game somewhere. I dream about winning enough money to pay everyone back, to fix all the problems I created. That's addiction talking. How do you know? Because I've heard the same kind of reasoning from Marines who drank too much, who couldn't stop using painkillers, who convinced themselves that the next drink or the next pill would solve their problems instead of making them worse. This is the conversation we should have had 6 months ago, before the stealing started, before the federal investigators got involved, before my family's private struggles became matters of public record. But we're having it now, which means it's not too late. The treatment center has a meeting tonight, I tell him. 7 p.m., Gamblers Anonymous, followed by family education for people affected by gambling addiction. You want to go to a meeting? I want to understand what we're dealing with, and I want you to hear from other people who've been where you are. Jake picks up the treatment center card, turning it over in his hands like it might reveal hidden instructions for fixing broken lives. What if they recognize me? What if word gets back to Messina that I'm in treatment? Then we deal with that problem when it happens. Right now, our biggest problem is that you're not getting the help you need, and if I go to treatment, if I cooperate with the FBI, if I do everything everyone wants me to do, what guarantee do I have that any of this works out? None. But I can guarantee that not getting help, not cooperating, not taking responsibility for your choices, that definitely doesn't work out. Jake nods slowly, and I see something shift in his expression. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement that his current approach isn't sustainable. Will you come with me? He asks. To the meeting. If you want me there, I want you there. We drive to the treatment center in silence. Two men from the same family dealing with different kinds of trauma and different kinds of recovery. Jake stares out the window, probably wondering if this is the first step toward healing or just another complication in an already impossible situation. Dad, he says as we pull into the parking lot. Yeah, I'm sorry I called your disability. Payments, unearned income. That was, he struggles for words. That was fucked up. Yeah, it was. I understand now. What you sacrificed. What the money represents. Understanding is a start, but understanding doesn't fix anything by itself. What fixes it? I look at the treatment center, a modest building that represents hope for people who've run out of options. Hard work, honesty, time, and maybe a little bit of luck. I thought you said this wasn't about luck. Recovery isn't about luck, but sometimes getting the chance to recover is. We walk toward the building together, father and son, veteran and addict. Two people trying to figure out how to rebuild trust when the foundation has been shattered by poor choices and broken promises. The new security protocol document bears today's date and Agent Torres's signature. 3 pages of updated procedures designed to prevent the kind of family exploitation that nearly destroyed my financial stability. It's addressed to all VA regional offices and represents a systematic response to a problem that's apparently more widespread than I realized. Your case became the template, Torres explains during our follow-up meeting at the VA building. The fraud detection algorithms, the investigation protocols, the cooperation agreements with federal prosecutors. Everything we learned from your situation is being implemented nationally. I scan the document, noting references to family member, access controls, and enhanced monitoring for unusual account activity, and mandatory financial counseling for beneficiaries who grant account access to relatives. How many other cases like mine are there? More than we'd like to admit, Torres says. Family financial exploitation of disabled veterans happens in about 12% of households where disability benefits are the primary income source. 12%? That means thousands of veterans dealing with family members who view disability compensation as supplemental household income rather than individual compensation for service-connected injuries. What's being done about it? Torres opens her laptop and shows me a presentation titled Protecting Veteran Benefits from Family Exploitation. Charts and graphs document the scope of the problem: average dollar amounts stolen, typical family, relationships involved, common justifications used by perpetrators, educational programs for veterans and their families about the legal status of disability benefits, she explains. Enhanced account security measures that make unauthorized access more difficult. improved fraud detection algorithms that flag unusual activity patterns faster, and partnerships with federal prosecutors to ensure serious cases get appropriate legal attention. Meaning what? Meaning family members who steal veteran benefits will face federal prosecution, not just family disappointment. The presentation includes a section on my case, identifying it as a successful intervention that prevented escalation and provided law enforcement cooperation. My family's dysfunction has become a case study in how to handle veteran financial exploitation. There's something else. Torres says, the VA wants you to consider participating in an educational program for other veterans. What kind of educational program? Speaking to veteran groups about your experience, explaining the warning signs of family financial exploitation, the importance of account security, the legal protections available. Your story could help other veterans avoid similar situations. The idea of sharing my family's private struggles with strangers makes my stomach clench. But Torres is right. If my experience can prevent other veterans from being robbed by their own children, maybe some good can come from this mess. What would that involve? Monthly presentations at VA medical centers, VFW posts, American Legion chapters, maybe 30 minutes talking about your experience, 30 minutes answering questions. The VA would provide travel expenses and a small speaking fee. How small? $200 per presentation. Not enough to live on, but enough to help with the legal expenses that keep accumulating. Patricia Chin's retainer alone cost $3,000. Money I had to borrow against my disability payments. I'll do it, I tell her. Are you sure? These presentations can be emotionally difficult. I think about Tony Rodriguez's challenge coin in my pocket, about the responsibility that comes with surviving when others didn't, about the opportunity to serve fellow veterans in a different way. I'm sure. Torres provides me with a folder containing educational materials, contact information for veteran organizations, and a draft presentation outline based on my case. The title slide reads, Family Financial Exploitation, a Veteran's Story of Betrayal and Recovery. Your first presentation is scheduled for next week, she says. VFW Post 1247. About 40 veterans, mostly Vietnam and Gulf War era. They're dealing with similar issues: adult children with financial problems, family members who don't understand the legal status of disability benefits. Any advice? Be honest about what happened, but focus on prevention rather than punishment. These veterans love their families, just like you do. They need to understand that protecting themselves financially isn't betraying their children, it's protecting their children from making life-destroying mistakes. The drive home gives me time to think about how to frame my family's story for public consumption. The shame, anger, and betrayal are personal emotions that won't help other veterans. But the lessons learned about trust and accountability and the importance of clear boundaries, those might prevent other families from facing federal charges. Jake is waiting in the kitchen when I get home, a stack of papers spread across the table. His cooperation with federal investigators has expanded beyond just wearing recording devices. Now he's helping map Tony Messina's entire criminal enterprise. How'd the FBI meeting go? I ask. They want me to testify before a grand jury next month, he says. About the gambling operations, the loan sharking, the money laundering. They think they can use my testimony to indict 8 people. How do you feel about that? Terrified, but also useful, I guess. Like maybe something good can come from my screw tips. I show him the VA security protocol document, explaining how our case has influenced national policy changes. Jake reads it carefully, noting the references to his theft of my benefits. I'm famous for all the wrong reasons, he observes. You're helping other veterans avoid what we went through. That's something. Not enough to make up for what I did. Nothing will make up for what you did. But helping other people might help. You live with what you did. Sarah arrives home from work as we're discussing the VA educational program. She's been at the accounting firm for 3 weeks now, learning about financial responsibility through hands-on experience with business, bookkeeping. They want Dad to speak to veteran groups. Jake explains to her. About what? About us. About how we almost destroyed the family by stealing his disability money. Sarah sits down heavily, still wearing her work clothes and looking exhausted. From managing full-time college courses and part-time employment. Is that what you want to do? She asks me. I think it's what I need to do. Will you tell them about the cooperation agreements? About Jake testifying against criminals? I'll tell them about accountability, about consequences, about the difference between loving your children and enabling their mistakes. Sarah nods thoughtfully. I think Mom would be proud of you for turning something terrible into something helpful. Maybe she's right. Linda always believed that difficult experiences were only worthwhile if they taught you something you could use to help other people. My family's federal case has certainly been educational about trust, accountability, the legal status of veteran benefits, and the importance of addressing problems before they become crises. There's one more thing. I tell my children that VA wants the whole family to participate in educational presentations, sometimes not sharing private details, but explaining how family financial exploitation affects everyone involved. You want us to tell strangers about our mistakes? Jake asks. I want you to help other families avoid making the same mistakes. And if it helps other veterans protect their benefits from family members who might take advantage of them, Sarah adds, then maybe we can turn our worst experience into something meaningful. We sit around the kitchen table, three people who've learned hard lessons about trust, money, and consequences. Outside, normal family life continues in houses where adult children don't steal from their disabled parents, where federal investigators don't get involved in family disputes, where cooperation agreements aren't necessary to avoid prison sentences. But inside our house, we're building something different, not normal, but honest, not easy, but meaningful. A family that understands the weight of choices and the possibility of redemption. The VFW newsletter feature runs 2 pages, complete with a photo of me standing next to the memorial wall and a headline that reads, "Local Veteran Turns Family Crisis into Educational Mission." The article describes my speaking engagements about financial exploitation without sensationalizing the federal charges or my children's mistakes. Veteran Marcus Sullivan has transformed a personal betrayal into a teaching opportunity, the article begins. After discovering that family members had accessed his disability benefits without authorization, Sullivan worked with federal investigators to address the situation and now speaks to veteran groups about protecting their financial security. Reading about my family's crisis in the community newsletter feels surreal, like seeing a movie based on your life starring actors who don't quite look like you. But the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Phone calls from fellow veterans sharing similar stories, emails from family members asking for advice about financial boundaries, and invitations to speak at veteran organizations across 3 states. You're becoming famous, Sarah observes as she reads the article over my shoulder. She's been supportive of my speaking engagements, even attending a few presentations to answer questions about the family perspective. Infamous, maybe no dad. Famous for the right reasons. For helping people, the VFW post where I gave my first presentation has invited me back twice, and other posts have requested similar programs. The format is simple: 30 minutes explaining what happened to my family, 30 minutes discussing prevention strategies, and 30 minutes answering questions from veterans who recognize elements of their own family situations in my story. The hardest part isn't talking about the money, I told the audience at American Legion Post 584 last week. The hardest part is talking about the broken trust. When your own children see your disability benefits as family income rather than compensation for sacrifice, it cuts deeper than any battlefield injury. The veterans in these audiences understand sacrifice in ways that civilian audiences might not. They nod when I explain the bureaucratic nightmare of obtaining proper VA care. They understand the phantom pain, the PTSD episodes, the way service-connected disabilities affect every aspect of daily life. Most importantly, they understand that disability benefits aren't charity, they're earned compensation. How do you forgive family members who steal from you? Asked a Vietnam veteran whose son had been draining his account to fund a drug addiction. You don't forgive the theft, I answered. You forgive the person while holding them accountable for their actions. Forgiveness doesn't mean avoiding consequences, it means facing consequences together as a family. Jake has started attending some presentations with me, sharing his perspective as someone who exploited family trust and worked with federal investigators to make amends. His presence adds credibility to my message about accountability and redemption. I told myself that my dad's disability money was just sitting there, not being used. Jake explained to a group of veterans at the Disabled American Veterans Chapter meeting. I convinced myself that taking small amounts wouldn't hurt anyone. I was wrong about everything. The money wasn't unused. The amounts weren't small, and stealing from a disabled veteran definitely hurts people. The questions Jake receives are often more pointed than mine. Veterans want to know why he thought theft was acceptable, how gambling addiction influenced his judgment, what consequences felt proportional to his crimes. He answers honestly, sometimes uncomfortably so. Prison time would have been proportional, he admitted. Cooperation with federal investigators gave me a chance to take responsibility, while helping law enforcement address the broader criminal enterprise that exploited my desperation. The educational impact extends beyond individual presentations. The VA has incorporated elements of my story into their official financial literacy programs for veterans and families. Federal prosecutors reference my case when explaining why family financial exploitation carries serious legal consequences. Military social workers use my experience as an example of how to address family dysfunction before it becomes criminal behavior. You've started something bigger than just speaking engagements, Tony Rodriguez observes during one of our regular coffee meetings. You've given veterans permission to talk about family financial problems without shame. He's right. The response to my presentations has revealed how widespread this problem is within the veteran community. Adult children who view disability payments as inheritance advances, spouses who use veteran benefits to fund personal expenses without permission, parents who access their veteran children's accounts during PTSD episodes and never return the money. Financial exploitation thrives in silence. I tell each audience, families don't talk about money problems until they become legal problems. Veterans don't report family theft because they're ashamed or afraid of destroying relationships. But silence protects the perpetrators, not the victims. The speaking fees have helped with legal expenses, though Patricia Chen's bills continue to accumulate as Jake's cooperation case works through federal court. More importantly, the presentations provide a sense of purpose that disability payments alone can't offer the satisfaction of serving fellow veterans in a different capacity. I never thought about my disability benefits being vulnerable to family theft, said a Gulf War veteran after my presentation at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Convention. My daughter's been asking for access to my account for emergencies, and I was planning to add her name next week. Now you'll think about security protocols first. Now I'll think about clear boundaries, written agreements, and regular account monitoring. And if she objects to those precautions, that'll tell me something important about her motivations. Sarah has become my unofficial research assistant, helping me prepare presentation materials and tracking the impact of our educational efforts. She's majoring in psychology with a focus on family therapy, and she uses our experience as a case study for understanding how financial stress affects family dynamics. 12 veterans have contacted the VA fraud hotline after hearing your presentations, she reports, showing me a tracking spreadsheet she's created. 4 cases involved adult children, 3 involved spouses, and 5 involved other family members. Total amount of unauthorized access, over $40,000. $40,000 in stolen veteran benefits, prevented or recovered because veterans learn to recognize warning signs and take protective action. The number represents real financial security protected, real families preserved, real consequences avoided. The next presentation is at Fort Carson. I tell Sarah, active duty military audience, plus family members. Different dynamic than veteran. Groups, different. How younger audience. Different perspectives on military service and family obligation. Some of them are probably dealing with financial stress similar to what Jake experienced. Are you nervous? Always. But not about the speaking part anymore. About whether the message resonates with people who haven't dealt with the aftermath of poor financial choices. It will resonate, Sarah assures me. Because you're not preaching about right and wrong, you're sharing what you learned from surviving something terrible. The VFW newsletter sits open on the kitchen table, documenting my transformation from victim of family financial exploitation to educator and advocate. The photo shows me in my civilian clothes, but I still carry myself like a Marine. Straight posture, direct eye contact, the bearing of someone who's faced difficult situations and emerged with lessons worth sharing. Dad, Sarah says as she heads upstairs to study. Yeah, I know this wasn't how you planned to spend your retirement, not even close. But I think you're making a bigger difference now than you could have made, just collecting disability payments and staying quiet about what happened to us. Maybe she's right. Maybe surviving family betrayal and working through federal cooperation agreements and learning to speak publicly about private pain has prepared me for a kind of service I never could have imagined when I was young and healthy, and convinced that military service was the only way to serve others. Some battles choose you, I tell her. This one chose me. The hospital bracelet reads Jacob Sullivan, Dob 13 Janeiro Mayo de 2006, admit November 23, 2025, in black letters that blur together when I try to focus on them through the haze of emergency room fluorescent lighting. Jake lies unconscious in the bed, his face swollen and discolored, his left arm in a cast, breathing steady but shallow, blunt force trauma to the head and torso. The doctor explains with the detached professionalism of someone who sees violence regularly. Concussion, broken arm, 3 cracked ribs. Could have been much worse meaning dead. The message Tony Messina's people intended to send was clear. Cooperation with federal investigators carries consequences that extend beyond courtrooms and testimony. When will he wake up? Hard to say. The concussion isn't severe, but his body is dealing with significant trauma. Could be hours, could be days. I settle into the uncomfortable chair beside Jake's bed, the same vigil position I occupied 8 years ago when Linda was dying of cancer in a room 2 floors up. Different crisis. Same helpless feeling of watching someone you love fight battles you can't fight for them. Agent Rodriguez, Jake's FBI handler, arrives an hour later with the grim news I expected. They found him in the parking lot of his community college. Security cameras show 2 men with baseball bats. Happened fast. Professional job. No witnesses willing to come forward. How did they know where to find him? Jake's been careful about following security protocols, but college campuses are hard to secure. Tony Messina's people have been watching him, waiting for an opportunity to send a message. What kind of message? Stop cooperating with federal investigators? Or next time the beating will be fatal. The federal case against Tony Messina has been building momentum for months, based largely on Jake's testimony and evidence gathering. Grand jury indictments were issued last week for 8 members of the criminal organization. Jake was scheduled to testify in federal court next month. Can you provide protection? We can try. Safe house. Witness protection protocols. Federal. Marshals, but Jake's a civilian, not a professional informant. Protecting him indefinitely is complicated. And if he stops cooperating, the federal case probably collapses. Messina and his associates walk free. And Jake spends the next 15 years looking over his shoulder, wondering when they'll decide he still knows too much. So my son's choices have narrowed to hiding in witness protection for the rest of his life, or living in fear of criminals, who've already demonstrated their willingness to use violence. Both options are consequences of the gambling addiction that started with $20 poker tournaments and escalated into federal cooperation agreements. Sarah arrives as visiting hours end, still wearing her work clothes and looking exhausted from the stress of watching our family crisis evolve into attempted murder. How is he alive? Unconscious? Probably going to recover physically and emotionally. Too soon to tell. We sit in the family waiting area, surrounded by other people, dealing with medical emergencies that probably don't involve federal investigations and criminal retaliation. Normal family crisis, heart attacks, car accidents, sudden illnesses that represent bad luck rather than consequences of poor choices. This is my fault, Sarah says quietly. No, it's not. If I hadn't helped him steal from you, if I'd refused when he asked for access to your account, if I'd told you what was happening, if Jake hadn't gotten involved with gambling, if he hadn't borrowed money from criminals, if he hadn't convinced you to help him steal from me. There are a lot of ifs in this story, Sarah. Most of them point back to Jake's choices, not yours. But I enabled him. Yes, you did. And you've taken responsibility for that. And you've learned from it. And you're rebuilding your life around better choices. That's all any of us can do. A different doctor appears. With an update, Jake is stable, but still unconscious, and they want to keep him for observation overnight. The brain swelling is minimal, but head injuries are unpredictable. Family? The doctor asks. Father and sister. He's lucky to have family support. Recovery from trauma like this is often as much emotional as physical. Lucky. That's what they called it when I survived the IED explosion that took my leg. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have medical care. Lucky to eventually receive disability benefits. Now Jake is lucky to survive a beating that was intended to kill him. Can I see him? 5 minutes. He probably can't hear you, but some patients respond to familiar voices. Jake looks smaller in the hospital bed, younger than his 19 years. Fragile in a way that reminds me he's still technically a teenager despite the adult consequences he's facing. The machines monitor his vital signs with steady beeping that should be reassuring but sounds ominous. Hey son, I say quietly, taking his uninjured hand. You're in the hospital, but you're going to be okay. The doctors say you'll recover completely. No response, but his breathing remains steady. I know you're scared about testifying, about Messina's people, about what happens next. I'm scared too. But we're going to figure this out together, like we always do. Still no response? But I continue talking anyway. I've been thinking about when you were little, before your mom died, before I got injured. You used to follow me around the house, trying to help with projects you were too small to understand. You'd hand me the wrong tools and ask a million questions, and generally make everything take twice as long. A slight change in his breathing, maybe just coincidence. But you never gave up, even when the projects were too hard, even when you got frustrated, even when I lost patience with all the questions. You'd keep trying until you figured it out, or until I finally explained it in a way that made sense. His eyelids flutter slightly, the first sign of consciousness since the attack. That's what we're going to do now. Keep trying until we figure out how to get through this safely. Federal prosecutors, witness protection, whatever it takes. But we're not giving up. Jake's eyes open slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually finding my face. His mouth moves, but no sound comes out initially. Dad. His voice is barely a whisper. Yeah, I'm here today. He struggles to remember what happened. The parking lot. Yeah, Tony's people. But you're alive, and you're going to recover. I can't do this anymore. Tears start flowing, mixing with the dried blood around his eyes. I can't testify against them. I can't live in hiding. I can't keep putting the family in danger. Jake, no. Dad, listen to me. I fucked up everything. The gambling, the stealing, the cooperation agreement, all of it. I thought I could be smart enough to get out ahead of it, but I was wrong about everything. His words come out in a rush, like he's been rehearsing this speech while unconscious. I want to withdraw from the cooperation agreement. Tell the FBI I'm not testifying. Let Messina's people know I'm not a threat anymore. That won't protect you. You still know too much. Maybe, but at least it'll protect you and Sarah. I look at my son, battered and broken in a hospital bed because he tried to do the right thing after making terrible choices. He's offering to sacrifice his safety, to protect the family he endangered through his gambling addiction. There's something you need to understand, I tell him. Federal prosecutors don't just let witnesses withdraw from cooperation agreements. Once you're in the system, you're in until the case is resolved. What does that mean? It means you're probably going to testify whether you want to or not. The question is whether you do it as a willing cooperator or as a hostile witness under subpoena. Jake closes his eyes, processing information that makes his situation even more complicated than he thought. And if I refuse to testify at all, contempt of court, federal jail time. And Tony Messina still considers you a threat, so I'm fucked either way. You're in a difficult situation with no easy answers. But that's different from being fucked. Sarah appears in the doorway, having convinced the nurses to let her visit despite the time restrictions. She takes one look at Jake's conscious but beaten face and starts crying. Oh Jake, I'm so sorry. Not your fault, sis. It feels like my fault. If I'd been stronger, if I'd said no when you asked for help, if, Jake interrupts, we could play that game forever. The truth is, I made bad choices that led to worse choices that led to federal cooperation agreements and criminal retaliation. Now we deal with the consequences. The maturity in his voice surprises me. Getting beaten nearly to death has apparently clarified his thinking about responsibility and consequences. Agent Rodriguez wants to meet with you when you're feeling better. I tell him to discuss security options and trial preparation. What kind of security options? Witness protection, new identity, relocation, federal marshals, the full program. For how long? Probably permanently. Jake stares at the ceiling, contemplating a future where he becomes someone else, lives somewhere else, cuts all ties to family and friends and everything familiar about his life. What would happen to you and Sarah? We'd adapt. We always do. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. Your safety is more important than our convenience. But is it more important than our family? The question hangs in the air like smoke from an explosion. Witness protection would keep Jake alive but destroy our family's ability to rebuild trust and heal from the damage his choices created. Survive physically but lose everything that makes survival worthwhile. I don't know, I admit, but I know that dead sons don't get second chances. Jake nods slowly, understanding that his choices have narrowed to variations of lose family through witness protection, or risk losing his life by staying connected to us. Can I think about it? You can think about it. But the decision might get made for you by people with badges and federal authority. How long do I have? Rodriguez will be here tomorrow morning. You'll need to give him an answer then. Sarah takes Jake's uninjured hand, and for a moment we look like a normal family dealing with a medical crisis. Rather than a broken family dealing with federal cooperation agreements and criminal retaliation, whatever you decide, Sarah tells Jake, we'll support you, even if it means not seeing you again for a long time. Even if it means never seeing me again. Even if it means never seeing you again. Jake squeezes her hand with what strength he has left. I love you guys. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that. We know, I tell him, and we love you too. Enough to let you go if that's what keeps you alive. The hospital bracelet on his wrist represents more than just medical identification. It represents the moment when my son's poor choices caught up with him in the most violent way possible. But it also represents survival, the possibility of recovery, and the chance to make better decisions going forward, even if those decisions are all bad in different ways. The restitution check sits on my kitchen table, made out for $2,547.83 and signed in Sarah's careful handwriting, the final payment that completes her court-ordered financial obligations. 18 months of part-time work, strict budgeting, and living at home have culminated in this moment when she officially repays every dollar she helped steal from me. It's done, she says, setting down her pen with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who's completed a marathon. Every penny, plus interest and penalties. I examine the check, noting how her signature has evolved over the months of making smaller restitution payments. More confident now, less shaky than when she first started working at the accounting firm. How does it feel? Like I can finally breathe again. Like I'm not carrying debt to my own father anymore. Sarah completed her cooperation agreement 6 months ago. Testimony that helped federal prosecutors build cases against Tony Messina and 7 associates. Her role was secondary, explaining how Jake convinced her to access my account, describing the family pressure and manipulation tactics used, but her honesty about the financial desperation that made her vulnerable to exploitation has become part of federal training materials for investigating family financial crimes. The federal prosecutor called yesterday, I tell her. Tony Messina was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. 6 of his associates got between 3 and 8 years. 1 cooperated and received probation. What about the people who hurt Jake? 25 years each, for attempted murder of a federal witness. Justice, of a sort. Not the kind that erases the trauma of watching your son beaten nearly to death, but the kind that ensures the people responsible face appropriate consequences. Jake emerges from his room, carrying a duffel bag and his laptop, prepared for another week in the federal safe house where he's been living since his testimony concluded. The witness protection program offered him permanent relocation, but he chose temporary security instead, a compromise that allows him to maintain family contact while staying protected during the legal proceedings. Sentencing is over. I tell him, you can come home if you want. Are you sure it's safe? Agent Rodriguez thinks so. With Messina and his people in federal prison, the immediate threat is gone. But there's no guarantee about future threats. Jake sets down his bag and sits at the kitchen table, studying Sarah's restitution check like it represents more than just money repaid. I want to come home, he says quietly, but I need to know that we can be a family again. Not the family we were before that family was broken in ways we didn't understand. A different family, built on honesty and accountability. What does that look like? It looks like family meetings where we actually talk about problems instead of hiding them. It looks like clear boundaries about money and responsibilities. It looks like consequences for poor choices, but also support for good choices. Sarah nods in agreement. And it looks like understanding that forgiveness isn't the same thing as forgetting. We can forgive each other without pretending that what happened was okay. Over the past 18 months, our family has participated in court-mandated therapy with Dr. Martinez, sessions that have been more educational than comfortable. We've learned about addiction, trauma, financial stress, and family dysfunction. More importantly, we've learned how to communicate about difficult topics without defensiveness or blame. I've been thinking about college, Jake says. Starting over at community college, studying something practical, business administration maybe, or accounting, something that teaches financial responsibility instead of just theory. What about your cooperation agreement? Completed, I testified, in 7 different federal cases, helped convict 12 people, provided evidence that dismantled an entire criminal organization. Federal prosecutors consider my cooperation exemplary. Exemplary cooperation in exchange for avoiding 15 years. In federal prison, the mathematics of justice that transformed my gambling-addicted son into a federal witness who helped law enforcement protect other victims from financial exploitation. I've been accepted to the state university for next fall, Sarah announces. Psychology program with a specialization in family therapy. I want to help families dealing with addiction and financial trauma. Sounds expensive. I got a scholarship, academic merit, plus a federal grant for students who've demonstrated significant personal growth. Apparently, completing federal cooperation agreements while maintaining good grades qualifies as significant personal growth. We sit around the kitchen table, 3 people who've learned hard lessons about trust, money, and consequences. The restitution check represents more than just financial debt. Repaid it represents accountability completed, trust slowly rebuilt, family bonds that proved stronger than criminal charges and federal investigations. There's something else, I tell them. The VA has offered me a permanent position with their fraud prevention program. Travel to different regions, train investigators, develop educational materials for veterans and families. That sounds perfect. For you, Sarah says, it means more travel, more time away from home, but it also means using our experience to help other families avoid what we went through. Do you want to take it? I want to take it, but not without knowing that this family is solid enough to handle me being gone sometimes. Jake looks around. The kitchen, at the spaces where we've had difficult conversations, made hard decisions, and slowly rebuilt trust that seemed irreparably broken 18 months ago. This family is solid, he says. Different than it was before, but solid. How can you be sure? Because we survived federal charges, criminal retaliation, and witness protection protocols. Because Sarah paid back every dollar she owed, even when it meant working 2 jobs while going to school. Because you chose accountability over easy, forgiveness, and justice over family loyalty. And because we're still here, Sarah adds, still talking to each other, still caring about each other, still committed to being honest even when honesty is uncomfortable. Dr. Martinez taught us that healthy families aren't families without problems. They're families that address problems honestly and work together to solve them. Our problems were bigger than most families face, but our commitment to addressing them honestly has made us stronger than we were when we were pretending everything was fine. I'll take the VA position, I tell them. Good, Jake says. Other veterans need to hear our story. Other families need to understand that financial exploitation isn't just theft, it's betrayal that damages relationships in ways that take years to repair. What if people judge us? What if they think we're a dysfunctional family that shouldn't be giving advice to anyone? Then they'll be missing the point, Sarah observes. We're not giving advice about how to be a perfect family. We're sharing what we learned about how to rebuild a family after serious mistakes threatened to destroy it. The restitution check sits between us. A piece of paper that represents Sarah's commitment to taking responsibility for her choices. But it also represents something larger, the possibility of redemption, the importance of accountability, and the hope that families can heal from even serious betrayals if everyone commits to honesty and growth. So what happens now? Jake asks. Now we keep doing the work. I tell him, individual therapy, family meetings, honest communication about problems before they become crises. And we help other families learn from our mistakes. And we remember that being a family isn't about avoiding problems, Sarah adds. It's about facing problems together. Even when facing them is scary. Especially when facing them is scary. Outside, normal suburban life continues. Neighbors, mowing lawns, kids riding bikes, families dealing with ordinary problems that don't involve federal investigations or witness protection programs. But inside our house, we're building something different from normal. Not perfect, but honest. Not easy, but meaningful. A family that understands the weight of choices and the possibility of redemption. The updated family photo sits on the mantel. Taken last month at Sarah's college graduation, we look different than we did in the Christmas photo that started this whole journey, older, more serious, but genuinely happy in a way that feels earned rather than assumed. Sarah, in her cap and gown, Jake in his community college transfer program polo shirt, me in my VA fraud prevention coordinator uniform, a family that's been through hell and emerged, changed but intact. 1 year later, the house feels like home. Again, instead of a crime scene under federal investigation, Jake lives here while finishing his associate degree. Sarah visits regularly from her apartment near the state university, and I travel monthly for VA educational programs that have expanded into a national initiative. 47 presentations this year, Sarah reports, updating the tracking spreadsheet that has become her voluntary contribution to our family's educational mission. Estimated audience of over 2,000 veterans and family members. 12 cases of financial exploitation prevented or reported based on feedback surveys. 12 families who avoided what we went through because someone shared our story at the right time. 12 veterans whose trust in their families wasn't violated because they learned to establish clear financial boundaries. 12 sets of adult children who understood the legal and ethical status of veteran disability benefits before making choices that could have destroyed their lives. The Federal Bureau of Investigation wants to use our case in their training academy, Jake announces, arriving home from his job at a nonprofit financial counseling center, teaching agents how to investigate family financial crimes without destroying family relationships unnecessarily. Are you comfortable with that? I'm comfortable with anything that helps law enforcement understand that most family financial exploitation involves desperation and poor choices rather than malicious criminal intent. Jake has been clean from gambling for 16 months, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice weekly and working with a sponsor who helps him navigate financial decisions and stress management. His job counseling other people with debt problems provides both income and perspective, understanding how financial desperation makes people vulnerable to poor choices. Dr. Martinez wants to schedule our annual family therapy session. Sarah says assessment of progress, discussion of ongoing challenges, planning for the year ahead. Annual therapy has become as routine as annual medical checkups. Preventive maintenance for family relationships that proved more fragile than we thought. Dr. Martinez helps us process the ongoing impact of our federal case, the stress of public speaking about private trauma, and the challenge of maintaining healthy boundaries while supporting each other's recovery. How are you feeling about the story being published? I ask them. The VA has approved a comprehensive case study based on our experience to be published in a federal law enforcement journal and distributed to social workers, family therapists, and financial counselors who work with veteran families. Our real names will be changed, but the details of our experience will be documented for professional education. Proud, Sarah answers immediately. Proud that something terrible became something useful. Nervous, Jake admits, but also hopeful that other families won't have to learn these lessons the hard way. The case study documents not just what happened to us, but what we learned about family dynamics, financial stress, addiction, and recovery. It includes Dr. Martinez's professional analysis of our therapy sessions, Agent Torres's perspective on the federal investigation, and Patricia Chen's observations about legal cooperation and family healing. There's something else, I tell them. The American Legion has asked me to speak at their national convention. Main auditorium, television coverage, audience of veteran leaders from across the country. That's huge, Dad. It's an opportunity to influence national policy on veteran financial protection. But it's also the most public our story has ever been. Are you ready for that? I think about the journey from discovering stolen money to becoming a national advocate for veteran financial protection. 2 years ago, I was a disabled veteran living quietly on disability benefits, focused on managing my PTSD and raising my children. Now I'm traveling the country, testifying before congressional committees, and helping shape federal policy on family financial exploitation. I'm ready, I tell them, but I want to make sure you're ready. This level of publicity means our story becomes public in ways we can't control. Our story is already public, Jake observes. Federal court records, cooperation agreements, witness testimony, it's all documented. The question is whether we control how it's shared or let other people interpret it for us. I vote for controlling how it's shared, Sarah says. Our version, our lessons, our message about accountability and redemption. We sit in the living room where we used to have family movie nights before everything got complicated, before gambling addiction and federal investigations and witness protection protocols became part of our vocabulary. The space feels comfortable again, filled with the kind of easy conversation that comes from surviving difficult times together. What do you think Mom would say about all this? Sarah asks a question that comes up periodically in our family meetings. She'd be proud of how we handled the consequences, I tell her, and she'd probably have strong opinions about financial boundaries and family accountability. She'd definitely have strong opinions. Jake agrees. Remember how she used to lecture us about taking responsibility for our mistakes? Apparently, she was preparing us for bigger mistakes than she imagined. We laugh. The kind of family humor that emerges from shared trauma and mutual forgiveness. Not the easy laughter of families who've never faced serious problems, but the deeper satisfaction of people who've survived something difficult together. So what happens next year? Sarah asks. You finish your psychology degree and start graduate school. Jake transfers to the state university and continues his financial counseling work. I keep traveling and speaking and helping other veteran families avoid our mistakes. And we keep doing the family work. We keep doing the family work. Therapy, honest communication, clear boundaries, accountability for choices. The foundation stuff that we didn't understand was important until we almost lost it. Together. The updated family photo catches the evening light, showing 3 people who look genuinely happy despite everything they've been through. Not the manufactured happiness of people pretending everything is fine, but the earned satisfaction of people who've faced their worst failures and chosen to grow from them. Outside, the neighborhood continues its normal rhythm, families dealing with ordinary problems that don't require federal cooperation agreements or witness protection protocols. But inside our house, we've built something that feels both ordinary and extraordinary, a family that understands the weight of choices, the importance of accountability, and the possibility of redemption. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought overseas. Sometimes they're fought in kitchen conversations and family therapy sessions and federal courtrooms. Sometimes the victory isn't avoiding the battle. It's surviving it with your integrity and relationships intact. Sometimes, coming home from war takes longer than you expect.